Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I have my September wrap-up. I meant to record this video last week, but unfortunately that didn't happen. We were having a rather good spell of making videos there, and time ran away with me. Anyway, in this video I am going to review some of the books I read in September. Two I won't be reviewing are Shuggie, Bain by Douglas Stuart and The Vanishing by Brit, Bennett, and that is because they are part of the BookTube prize and I want to discuss them in my final review and rankings video that I should be recording soon, hopefully, maybe. They've announced the winner now. It's a good job I keep a journal of the books that I've read because oftentimes I end up forgetting what I read in a month. Sometimes books linger with me and I think that it's been less time than it had, and sometimes I forgot that I read them. Anyway, the first book I read in the month was The Vanishing, and then I read Shuggie, Bain. Then I read The Lost Daughter by Elena Ferrante, translated by Goldstein, and that copy has already been returned to the library. However, I do have a full review of that, so I will leave a link to that in the description where you can go and find out my thoughts. I then read The Public Image by Muriel. This book is about this girl who has come from nothing, who has become a celebrity, and she always wants to make sure that the image that the public has of her is perfect. She is in a loveless marriage and she has moved to somewhere in Italy. I can't remember where. It might be Rome. I don't want to specify that because I can't really properly remember this. I remember finding it humorous whilst I read it and enjoying that as another Muriel book to not really have to think too much about. But it hasn't lingered in my mind really as much as Territorial Rights did last month. However, in terms of the public image, I do think it says a lot about the perception that we want other people to have of what goes on behind closed doors, how intense media speculation can be, and how dependent on your status as a human being you can really control the structure of your life, the way it's perceived, the way it's going to go, in ways that other people perhaps cannot. Again, it was funny, it was filled with dramatic irony and tension, and there is a lot of be careful what you wish for sort of scenarios when it comes to Muriel that I appreciated here. Then we have Outline by Rachel Cusk. I read the entire Outline trilogy this month, so maybe I will just mention them all here and then go back. So we have Outline, Transit and Kudos, all by Rachel Cusk, all I believe follow the character of Faye. I was watching a vlog from Rebecca Eats Books last night in which she swapped books with her husband and he read Outline, and from there I got more context and more of an idea that this book is really also showing us the outline of who this woman is, and I get that. However, there is a lot in here about the breakdown of marriage and divorce, and I think that with these books it's more about Cusk analysing a topic and doing that through the means of conversation and showing us what the narrator is finding important or relevant about a specific topic. So in this book it was divorce. In Transit there was a lot about motherhood and again perception and the way that things are different behind closed doors and how difficult it is to be a parent. And then Kudos followed along with all of those themes, as well as what it means to be a writer, what it means to be a creator. Quite honestly, with I think that for me, I favoured Transit and then Kudos would come at the bottom of the list. I think that Cusk is a brilliant writer for examining these things. And the way she does it by showing us these different vignettes of what other characters believe about a certain topic is fantastic, and I really appreciated that. And I think that, as is mentioned in this video from Rebecca Eats Books, there's this plotless, but it's about appreciating the book on a sentence by sentence level, and this is something that I couldn't really do before when it came to literature. I needed this plot and I needed this structure, but something that I've appreciated recently is this slowing down. I think that I appreciate Transit more because, again, and I mentioned this in a review I did, or a video. I mentioned it at some point, that Transit reminded me of Motherland, the TV show, and I think that the connection that I placed there, that isn't necessarily ever present to anybody else, is what improved that book for me. But also, it was more suburban, it was more realistic, because I have never lived the life of this writer who gets to go and do these big tours in other countries and be on the stage. I did think that there was a great scene in Kudos where the writer is stuck there whilst these other male writers are getting to discuss what it means to be who they are, and they have this arrogance as though they are somewhat fantastic, and they're given all the time to speak, and she kind of is only given time to read what she's already written. And she does, again, it mentions the kudos, she doesn't really get given the kudos that these male writers are given. And maybe that's what the whole book there is about attributing awards and recognising talent when talent is there, rather than just focusing on the next big thing. But as a trilogy, and to provoke thought, I think that this is a great series of books. I would like to go back and revisit them. I think that that's the thing when it comes to Cusk. Every time I finish it, I think I want to go back, revisit that, and explore those sentences again and see what the writer was saying. Like, it's like great short stories, in that you want to go back and unpick certain things and go back and see how you might feel about that topic 5 years down the line. Rather enjoyed that one. So now we go back, and I finished listening to The Sweetness of Water by Nathan Harris. This was longlisted for the Booker Prize, and Charlie Brooke gifted me this audiobook because she had enjoyed the narrative herself, and unfortunately I did not care for it. So let's talk about why. We are introduced to this character of George, and it's just after slavery has been abolished in America. George hears of this tragedy, and he believes his son to be dead. He then employs 2 former slaves from a nearby farm. When I began listening to this tale, I thought that it was an excellent exploration of grief. It was quiet, and the writing was sublime, and I could not believe that someone who is the similar age as me, or the same age — I'm old now, people. I started my career as a young writer, and I'm so old people don't read my books because they're like, anybody's doing it. But anyway, this guy has written this book, and it starts off and it's quite good, and I'm enjoying what I'm listening to. And then it just gets dramatic, and it gets predictable, and at one point, the antagonist of the piece gets referred to as evil. And when that happened, I was pulled out of the story, because the writer has already presented us with this character who is racist, he is demeaning to people, he is bigoted. He is all the things that in the 21st century we hopefully abhor. Yet the writer chooses to tell us that this character is evil. And at that moment in time, I was irked, because it's not necessarily about showing over telling, it's about the writer getting too lost inside his own story to properly, and his own way of thinking, to be more considerate about what he's leaving in his novel. I don't know why this book was longlisted for the Booker. I don't hold it... I disliked Light Perpetual. I did not dislike this book as much as I disliked Light Perpetual. I think that they're similar in the fact that there is definitely something spiritual about them, and I don't mean that that ever comes into the context of the piece, but in that there's something very biblical about the story being told in The Sweetness of Water. I just did not care for it. If it had continued along this line of being this quiet exploration of grief and what have you that seemed to be what was getting promised at the start, then I would have favoured this more, but it swiftly changed into normal historical drama territory, and as I say, was rather predictable. And it was this predictability and this inability to notice when the writing was not up to standard that just ruined the experience. Next, I listened to The Amazing Maurice and His Educated Rodents by Terry Pratchett. This tale of Pratchett's is one that was, I don't know whether it was middle grade or young adult, but it riffs on the fairy tale of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, and then it brings in loads of other fairy tales as well in order to tell its story, where you have a cat who's gained the ability to speak, and he's got these rodents who will go into the town. The cat goes in and he sells himself as this hunter of the rats, basically, and then they move on to the next town, that sort of thing. Only they arrive in one town and it seems that there's already been a plague of rats and there's already something somewhat more sinister going on. I enjoyed it. It's in the middle for me. It's a bit middling. It's neither here nor there. I didn't find it fantastic. I found that I could switch it off, leave it for weeks and not listen to it. I would smile occasionally at the bits where I could see what Pratchett was doing, where he was referring to certain fairy tales, and I liked the way that he would create pastiches or parodies of them. But overall, it wasn't really his best work. I think that had a much younger Charlie read this book, then that much younger Charlie would have appreciated this book more than I did. But what can you do? Sorry, I'm trying to finish this video before my coffee gets cold. Between those books, I read On a Distant Ridgeline by Sam Reese, which I have got a review for, and I will also leave a link to that in the description. But a fantastic short story collection that I hope you all go out and have a gander at. Then I read Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. I have a vlog where I read this, and I will leave a link to that as well. But I do need to talk about it here because I never actually came up with a final opinion of this book. Martha is a woman struggling with some mental illness that is never disclosed in here, and at the back there is an author's note that is quite important where it says that her symptoms are not representative of any one mental illness but are symptoms of a variety. Martha has been struggling with this from adolescence into adulthood, and we begin at the breakdown of one relationship, then go back in time to see her throughout her life, how she's been affected, and then reach the end and come past the part in which the story began. Everywhere I look, Jessie Burton called this jaw-droppingly funny. It's been called unforgettable, impossible not to laugh out loud. And everywhere, everyone's talking about how funny this book is. Whilst there are lines that I found humorous, I can't help but wonder whether these people weren't reading different books. Maybe I should have seen Anne Patchett on the cover and thought that this perhaps would not be a book that I would favour. There's a lot about motherhood in here. A lot of the books I read this month ended up being about motherhood. But in the middle of this book, Martha's talking about how she doesn't want to be a mother, and she has to come up with excuses as to why. And I thought that it was good to see that represented in fiction. For spoiler reasons, I can't talk about how all of that is resolved, but it felt like the final 25-30% of this book didn't match up with the start of this book. Suddenly we had characters turning against Martha, and now throughout, you know that Martha is able to recognise that some of what she's done is perhaps a little bit reprehensible, and she understands that. There is still the support network there, and then towards the end the support network starts to break down, and there's this revelation from Martha about her character that just seemed to come out of nowhere, and I felt was actually not redundant, but it fed into a certain idea that people have about women that it just didn't sit right with me, and I don't feel comfortable saying that as a male reader reading this book by a female author about something that is very, to some, very much a topic and discussion only fitting for women. So I will leave it to the more knowledgeable and the more suitable readers and reviewers to talk about that. But that part didn't sit right with me and made it difficult for me to navigate how I felt about this book, because I found it a quick read that I wanted to get through, because I was feeling for Martha as a character. Even when she was doing reprehensible things, I could almost understand her. There were moments that she was having that I could understand because of struggles I have had in the past. And whilst this wasn't representative of any one disorder, I thought that was also a good thing, because it meant that people would be able to recognise themselves in the character and maybe recognise that their mental health struggles by no means made them less of a person. As I've mentioned, Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson is one of those books that I read and reread when I was going through a particularly sad time in life. And I thought that this book could have stood up there until that final 30% of the book, in which even the style of writing changed. There were more grammatical errors, and I couldn't help but feel like the start of the novel had been one thing, and then the publisher maybe intervened and were like, right, you need to change this, because the final 30% just seems to veer off in some fashion that it makes no sense to the rest of the narrative that I read. So unfortunately, I didn't end up enjoying this book as much as I thought I would, based on what I'd read in the beginning. Which is strange, because now I want to talk about No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, and that's exactly how I felt about that book. It's a novel told in 2 parts. You've probably heard about how it's written in this almost vignette style, based on the fact that this person is so tapped into her phone that she's only really writing in sound bites. And so you moved from topic to topic really quickly without any time to really consider what's happening or what's being talked about, which is great when you consider the title of the novel and you consider that the author is trying to give a portrayal of the world in which we now live. Great. It was fitting for trying to create this idea of a Twitter sphere or something to do with social media. That first part really worked and I felt like it was, whilst I didn't finish Duck's New Report when I started reading that, it reminded me of that in the almost anxiety-inducing pace of moving from topic to topic with little space to consider what was being said. Then we reach the second part, in which the character from the first part is now having to focus on what is going on in the world, in her personal life. And this is where I just felt like the writing did not match up to the story being told. It did feel like a story in 2 parts, in that the first part felt like it was going to lead somewhere, but then it feels like something happened and the author decided to include a certain narrative in her novel because that was what was on her mind. And there's a great bit in the acknowledgements that is which is talking about using this book to raise awareness. And it just, to me, it felt a bit heavy-handed. Now, it's one of those things where it seems like a bit of a metaphor for spending your life on your phone or tapped into the internet. You're going to forget to pay attention to what's going on in your life. I thought that if this was going to be properly discussed, the author needed more pages in which to do that, because right at the end there's something again that feels like it's tacked on, in which the character ends up going as doing some sort of presentation, and to me it just felt a bit shoehorned in there, and it's one of the issues that I am finding in modern literature at the moment, which is perhaps why I'm reading this backlisted titles, because so often in modern literature it just feels like, don't you think you ought to go back and maybe just spend more time with the story? Because that first part was great, and the second part could have been great if those 2 pieces came together and led anywhere. And I know that I talked about Cusk earlier and how Cusk's novels don't really have any plot and don't really lead anywhere. It's just a discussion about a tale. But there is usually, as with most novels, a turning point towards the end. It is incredibly subtle, but it makes sense. The turning points within these books have been so shoehorned in, it feels almost like when I was writing Indisputably Doris and I recognised that I was so close to the end and I belted out 21,000 words in 3 days, and when I'm reading that novel, all I can see with those last 3 chapters is how frenetic it becomes. And had I gone back now, I would perhaps slow it down, pace it out a bit so that it matches the start, so that the tone is similar, so that the story is as powerful as it could be. And unfortunately, I don't think that either no one is talking about this or Sora and Bliss did that. I feel like the authors recognised they were towards the end of their stories, and it's not that they gave up, it's that they saw a finish line and they rushed towards it without making sure that that portion of their book was as strong as the earlier part of it. And that's why I ended up not liking them. There we go. You got to see me work that out in my head there. My coffee did end up getting cold, and I don't blame you for that. I blame me. If you've read any of these books and would like to discuss them, then please feel free to do so in the comments. You know, vacancies for subscribers are still available if you'd like to press that button as well. I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.